A big part of having a smart home is having stuff happen without you having to initiate them. And there are a few ways that you can achieve this. To start with, you can put your automations on a timer, ensuring that the lights, the TV, your robot vacuums, and whatever smart home gadget that you have will start or stop at the time that you designate. But unless you want to live your life on a strict schedule, I wouldn't recommend doing this for most people. The second option is to use something like these. These are passive infrared motion sensors, and they work by detecting movement. One of the only downsides of these are their sensitivity or their lack thereof. You sometimes have to make a lot of movement for these to register you, meaning that you have to stand around and wave your arms for your lights to turn on. So if you have your lights set up to react to the movements from these sensors, you can't stay too still for too long. And that's where sensors like these two come into play. These are the eMotion Max and Pro presence sensors from LinknLink. You've probably heard of presence sensors before, but in case you haven't, the way that these works is basically that they are small radars for your smart home. They send out radio waves, 24 GHz for the Pro and 60 GHz for the Max. And they use these radio waves to determine your location in the room while also being sensitive enough to movement to detect movement as small as your chest moving just from you breathing. It sounds so incredibly futuristic to me, and I absolutely love it. It also means that in contrast to the old style passive infrared motion sensors, you can stand completely still without them thinking that you have left the room. LinknLink has sent me the eMotion Pro and the eMotion Max for me to test out. And after having had them installed for a couple of weeks now, I definitely have some thoughts on them. So let's have a look at what kind of features that you get by installing the LinknLink eMotion Max and the LinknLink eMotion Pro in your smart home. So first off, whether you opt for the eMotion Max or the eMotion Pro, the unboxing is basically the same between the two sensors. Both devices' boxes are pretty much identical, save for a few graphical differences. But other than that, both the boxes and the contents of the boxes are the same. In the box, you'll get the eMotion device itself, a USB Type A to USB Type C cable, and thank you LinknLink for including a USB Type C with this device. I'm looking at you, semi-smart. A mount with double-sided tape that also doubles as a stand. And then lastly, a user manual. Well, the USB cable that you get is really short. It's only around 1.5 meters long, which I feel is way too short. So if you don't have an outlet near where you plan on using the presence sensor, you might have to go out and get another cable for yourself. I simply resorted to using an old cable that I had lying around. I also have to add that the mount that is included is probably the worst mount that I have ever seen in any smart home product ever. It feels really cheap and the degrees of movement isn't really that great. When using it as a stand, it also isn't really that stable, and unless you bend the cable in a weird way, it won't stand by itself without using the double-sided tape underneath it. I'm also really not a fan of using double-sided tape for stuff like this. If I ever want to change the cable, I will need to re-add some new double-sided tape just by changing out the cable for the device. Why LinknLink hasn't just opted for something that would press fit into the back of the device is beyond me. But luckily, I own a 3D printer. While my stand isn't great when compared to other stands, I definitely feel like it has some benefits over the one that LinknLink provides you with. If you're interested in the model, I'll leave a link to my printables in the description. The device itself looks pretty good in my opinion, and it's definitely an upgrade over the last presence sensors from LinknLink. If you're not a fan of shiny plastic though, this might not fit too well into your smart home. But personally, I don't really mind it. I think it's a pretty good looking device, and I think it's among one of the best looking presence sensors that you can get at the moment. And besides of the aesthetics, it's also pretty small. It's actually smaller than my Philips Hue motion sensor. Now, given the Philips Hue motion sensor is a battery powered device, while the LinknLink eMotion Max and Pro are both mains powered, but still it's a pretty small device when everything is considered. So the eMotion Pro is a 24 GHz millimeter wave presence sensor, while the eMotion Max is a 60 GHz millimeter wave presence sensor. The higher the frequency, the greater the resolution of the presence detection. Well, at least in theory. During my testing, I haven't really noticed a difference in the sensitivity of the Pro and the Max. Both have been pretty good at picking up my movement or my lack of movement, and both have been pretty quick to react when I've entered the room or if I've moved to a different space in the room. So while a higher frequency might be an advantage in theory, in practice, at least with these two sensors, I haven't really found it to be the case. One thing that can be a deal breaker for a lot of people is when a smart gadget needs a specific hub in order to work. Well, if you're one of these people, then you'll be happy to hear that you don't need a hub with either of these devices. Both of these devices connect to your network via Wi-Fi. So you won't need a LinknLink hub or a hub from any other manufacturer if all you want are these presence sensors and a couple of other LinknLink devices. Just be sure to set them up to your 2.4 GHz network, since they don't support 5 or 6 GHz Wi-Fi. These are all the specs taken directly from LinknLink's own website. So if you want to see them, you can just pause the video. One huge difference between these sensors are their tracking capabilities. The eMotion Max supports 3D tracking across the space, meaning that you can be at different places in the room and it will be able to tell you where in the room that you are currently at. The eMotion Pro, on the other hand, can only detect distance from the sensor and sense you in a 2D space. And while that may seem like a downgrade from the eMotion Pro, I actually have found that it's not as huge of a deal as I initially have thought, especially if you're using these as a way of detecting presence in the room as a whole, and not in specific areas of the room. If you do want to detect presence in specific areas of the room, then the eMotion Max is definitely the one to get. But we'll get to that in a moment. And well, I guess that basically covers most of the specs for these two devices. If you feel like I've missed anything, then please feel free to ask away in the comments. While the main feature of these devices are obviously to detect your presence in the room, they do have a few extra features up their sleeve. Firstly, they both feature a lux sensor, meaning that they detect the brightness in your room. If you plan on controlling your lights with any kind of movement, then a lux or brightness sensor is absolutely essential. For example, I don't want the lights in my kitchen to turn on at all hours of the day. I only want them to turn off if either the sun has gone down or if it's really cloudy outside and I need light to see what I'm doing. So by combining the brightness value of the sensor and the presence detecting, I can simply create an automation that says if presence is detected and the light is under a specific threshold, then turn on the lights. Otherwise, do nothing. But if presence and brightness sensing isn't enough to win you over, maybe the fact that these also include an IR emitter will. So yeah, basically you can add IR devices to this device. They already have a huge database of TVs, air conditions, and all kinds of IR-based devices in their app. And you can just add any of those. So I have a Samsung TV in my living room. And while I am able to add it to my Home Assistant instance via the SmartThings integration, the SmartThings integration doesn't allow me to play or pause a video on YouTube. It's pretty weird and I don't know why that is, but it's just how it is. So by using a combination of the SmartThings and the LinknLink integration, I'm now able to fully control my TV in my living room. So do I really use IR devices? Yeah, well, no, not really. The only thing I have that uses IR is my TV. And even that has a Bluetooth connected remote. But still, the IR feature is nice to have just in case. But the best part about the presence, the light and the IR emitter is the fact that they are exposed to other smart home systems. Which brings us to the next part. On LinknLink's website, they show that these devices are both compatible with Google Home, Alexa, and, the most important to me at least, Home Assistant. Connecting it to Google Home or Alexa is done through the cloud. But if you want to connect it to Home Assistant, it's done via MQTT. I don't have any previous MQTT devices, so setting the sensors up also meant setting up an MQTT configuration in Home Assistant. Yeah, well, no problem, I thought. I'll just follow the video from Lewis from his YouTube channel, Everything Smart Home, on how to actually set up MQTT in Home Assistant. LinknLink even recommends this video in the app for when setting up MQTT, but that led to some confusion for some time. You see, it turns out that a lot of the information in the now 4-year-old video has changed since then. This, of course, is no critique of Lewis at all, who made a great video that I'm sure was correct at the time of uploading. But it does feel weird that LinknLink is including a video that gives you some wrong information on how to set up the MQTT in Home Assistant. If you link to a third-party video explaining on how to set up your device, at least make sure that the information is still correct and relevant. Anyhow, I figured it out with the help of another video, and since setting it up, the connection has been rock solid and I haven't experienced any dropouts at all. So if you plan on connecting these devices to Home Assistant, I recommend this video from Joyce Lynn. That is, if you don't already know how to set up MQTT devices. Well, I do now at least. So thank you, Joyce. But no matter what smart home platform that you choose to use, you'll still need the LinknLink app to set up the device when you first get it. That's because it's in the app that you'll set up the different zones that will trigger different automations. You'll also need the app to initiate the MQTT or the connection to Google Home or Alexa. When you connect the devices to your smart home platform of choice, it's these zones that are exposed to those apps. Each zone are then shown as presence either being detected or being clear. In Home Assistant, you'll also get the brightness exposed, and you'll also get an entity that tells you if presence has been detected, regardless if that presence is detected in a zone or not. But it's also in the LinknLink app that you'll set up the time it takes for these devices to report a space as occupied or vacant. You don't necessarily want a space to be occupied the moment someone enters it, and unoccupied the moment someone leaves it. It's even possible to differentiate this for 3 different time slots, which I think is extremely useful. During my testing of the 2 devices, I have encountered a few problems while setting up the device and changing the settings that has caused some frustration. The first problem I had was simply connecting it to my network. It refused a couple of times before finally accepting my credentials. The second problem I had was that the app would crash every time I tried to change some of the settings. But since then, LinknLink has pushed an update to both the devices and the app, and I haven't experienced any problems since then. So if you get these devices and experience any of the 2 problems, simply hang in there, update the devices and the app, and see whether or not that resolves some of the issues. The only minor quirk that I've experienced since then is that the zones doesn't show up on the map. I have to enter each specific zone to see where I've placed them. This doesn't affect the functionality of the sensors at all, and it's purely a cosmetic issue. So LinknLink, if you're watching, this seems like a pretty easy bug to squash. And seeing how fast you reacted to me reporting the other 2 bugs that I mentioned right before this one, I have no doubt that this will be resolved in the near future. Other than the initial setup, the sensors seem to be pretty reliable. They haven't lost connection to Home Assistant or the app even once. One thing I was pleasantly surprised about was the reaction time of these sensors. I've always heard that using presence sensors wasn't such a good idea for turning on lights, since they are slower to react than something like a traditional PIR sensor. And while they are a tad slower than my Philips Hue motion sensors, we are talking fractions of a second here. Something that I can easily live with. And if speed really is that important to you, you could always turn on the lights with a traditional PIR sensor and then have the presence sensor turn it off again once it detects that no one is in the room anymore. So, to sum it up, what is the final verdict of these devices? Would I have been happy if I had bought these with my own money? And well, the answer is, well, yeah, I would. What you get with these devices are cheap presence sensors that detects presence fairly reliably. They also include an IR emitter and also a brightness sensor within the housing of the sensor. So really get 3 sensors in one. And if you can live with the, again, terrible stand that LinknLink provides you with, or if you simply want to hang them on the wall and don't mind using double-sided tape, or if you have a 3D printer and print my model, then I have a hard time finding something that I really don't like about these devices. Well, yeah, while the cable isn't too long, and it would have been nice to see a twice as long cable within the box, and you also need to provide your own power plug, I think that the value you get for these sensors is fairly good, especially when you compare them to something like the Aqara FP2, that is kind of like the standard in presence sensing at the moment. Currently you can get the eMotion Pro for $37 from LinknLink's own website, while the LinknLink eMotion Max is available for $55. They also have an eMotion Ultra coming that includes more features, but also a higher price tag. They've promised me to send one over once it's released, and when I get it, I'll be sure to check it out and compare it to the previous eMotion Max and Pro models and see whether or not that might be worth getting instead. But in the meantime, if all you're looking for is a sensor to detect your presence in a room, then I would highly recommend having a look at the LinknLink devices. They're reliable, they're cheap, and they don't look too bad. But that's everything for now. If I have missed anything, please feel free again to let me know in the comments below or send me a message. I'll be sure to check that out and reply as fast as I can. I also have a few more devices coming from different companies, some of which are heavily focused on Matter. So if you're curious about those, stay tuned. You can also follow me on Twitter or X and Threads, where I post more regularly than on YouTube. Otherwise, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.